A shocking discovery shakes a wealthy family when a young boy notices something unusual about the millionaire's white toddler. But what happens next will leave everyone speechless. An unexpected revelation that changes everything. A wealthy neighborhood in New York glows with the warmth of twinkling Christmas lights. Elegant homes line the streets, each decorated with festive wreaths, golden ribbons, and towering Christmas trees visible through wide glass windows. The air is crisp, carrying the scent of pine and the distant hum of carolers singing on a nearby corner. Snowflakes drift lazily through the air, settling on rooftops and sidewalks, completing the picture-perfect holiday scene. Jaden, a 12-year-old black boy, stands outside a lavish mansion, waiting for payment after delivering groceries. He shifts on his feet, blowing into his hands for warmth. The grand house before him, adorned with garlands and flickering lights, is the kind of place he only sees when working. Unlike the struggling neighborhood he calls home, this street is full of wealth. Houses bigger than he can imagine, driveways lined with luxury cars, and windows glowing with the warmth of a life far removed from his own. The contrast is stark, and it always makes him wonder what it would be like to live here, to have more than just enough to get by. Jaden lives with his sickly grandparents, who have raised him since he was a baby. With their health failing, he takes on small jobs to help however he can. He delivers groceries, carries packages, and sometimes shovels snow in the winter. It's not much, but every dollar counts. He doesn't mind the work, but on nights like this, when the cold seeps into his bones and hunger gnaws at his stomach, he wishes things were different. Tonight, he only has one last stop before heading home, where his grandmother will have a warm bowl of soup waiting for him. As he waits, something catches his eye. On the mansion's grand front porch, a small figure stands motionless. Jaden squints through the dim light, his heart skipping a beat. A toddler, no older than 2 or 3, is barefoot, shivering in the cold. The child's oversized, soiled shirt barely covers their swollen belly, their tiny arms wrapped around themselves for warmth. Their face is partially hidden beneath unkempt curls, but Jaden can see the unmistakable signs of distress. The sight sends a chill through him that has nothing to do with the winter air. Jaden's pulse quickens. This isn't normal. Something is terribly wrong. A child, dressed like this, alone outside a house like this? It doesn't make sense. His first thought is that maybe the child wandered out without their parents realizing. But something in his gut tells him it's not that simple. He knows what neglect looks like. He has seen kids in his neighborhood struggling, going without the basics. But never here. Never in a place like this. The boy hesitates, glancing at the closed front door. Did the child wander outside unnoticed? Where were the parents? Should he knock again? His mind races with questions, but instinct tells him one thing. This child should not be out here like this. The cold is biting, and the toddler's bare feet look dangerously red. Every second that passes feels like an eternity. Someone needs to do something. He takes a cautious step forward. "Hey, little guy. Are you okay?" His voice is soft, careful not to startle the toddler. The child doesn't answer, only looking up at him with wide, glassy eyes. Jaden notices the slight tremor in the child's lips, the way their tiny body seems to sway on unsteady legs. Jaden glances around. The street is quiet, the glow from the Christmas lights making everything feel oddly still. No one else seems to notice the child. He clenches his fists, debating his next move. His gut tells him to act fast, but the uncertainty of what comes next makes his heart pound. Jaden's heart races. This isn't normal. Something is terribly wrong. Have you ever sensed something was off before anyone else noticed? Share your experience. Jaden hesitantly approaches, concern filling his young face. His breath comes out in small clouds in the cold air as he steps closer to the shivering child. His heart beats faster, but he keeps his voice soft, gentle, careful not to scare them. "Are you okay? What's wrong?" he asks, kneeling slightly to be at the toddler's level. He waits for a response, searching the child's face for any sign of understanding, but the only thing staring back at him are wide, fearful eyes that seem lost and empty. The child's lips tremble, but no words come out. The child doesn't respond, doesn't even make a sound. Instead, they lift their tiny shirt, revealing a round, swollen stomach. Jaden's stomach twists. Was the child sick, hurt, or worse? The toddler's belly is distended, the skin stretched tight, making Jaden's mind race through the possibilities. Malnutrition, illness, a sign of something far worse. He feels a deep unease settle in his chest. His instincts tell him that whatever is happening here, it is not right. He has seen hungry kids before, but this feels different. This feels wrong. He quickly glances around. The house behind them is massive, its grand Christmas tree glowing warmly through the front window. Inside, everything looks perfect. Too perfect. The sight of twinkling lights and a home that radiates wealth contrasts sharply with the neglect right in front of him. A toddler standing barefoot in the cold, stomach swollen, clothes dirty. How could this be happening in a place like this? Where were the parents? Why was no one watching this child? It doesn't make sense. Nothing about this situation feels normal, and the weight of it presses heavily on Jaden's chest. Jaden looks toward the door again. Maybe they don't know the child wandered outside. Maybe they're inside, completely unaware. But his instincts tell him something is wrong. Very wrong. He clenches his fists, unsure of what to do next. He wants to knock, to demand answers, but something about the eerie silence in the house stops him. If the people inside cared, why was the child in this state to begin with? The warmth and joy displayed inside that house is a stark contradiction to the cold reality standing before him. He swallows hard, torn between acting and hesitating. What if he's wrong? What if he knocks and they accuse him of something? He knows how people like them see kids like him. Poor, black, out of place in a neighborhood like this. Would they even listen to him? Or would they call the police instead? The thought sends a cold shiver down his spine. He can't afford trouble. His grandparents rely on him. One wrong move and everything could fall apart. But he also knows that walking away would mean leaving this child alone in the cold, and that is something he cannot do. But the toddler's chattering teeth snap him out of his thoughts. He can't ignore what's right in front of him. He can't just walk away. He takes a deep breath, his decision made. Someone needs to know. Someone needs to help this child. He doesn't know who will listen, but he knows that doing nothing is not an option. His heart pounds as he looks around one last time, knowing that whatever happens next could change everything. His instincts scream, "Tell someone!" But would they even listen to a poor black boy? What would you do if you were Jaden? Jaden knocks on the grand wooden door, heart pounding. The cold air bites at his fingers as he waits, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. He has no idea how this will go, but his gut tells him he can't just walk away. The child outside isn't safe, and someone inside this house needs to do something. His breath comes out in shaky puffs as he listens for movement beyond the door. After a few moments, the heavy door creaks open. Standing before him is a tall, well-dressed man with piercing blue eyes that scan Jaden with instant disgust. His expensive silk robe is loosely tied at the waist, and the faint scent of expensive cologne drifts into the night air. His gaze lingers on Jaden's worn jacket, his chapped hands, the slight dirt on his shoes. Everything about him radiates impatience, irritation, and something much colder. Dismissal. "What do you want, boy?" The man's voice is sharp, dripping with irritation. Jaden stiffens, He knew he wouldn't be welcomed, but the outright hostility still stings. For a second, he considers backing away, but then he remembers the toddler's bare feet, their swollen belly, their trembling frame. He forces himself to stand his ground, lifting his chin slightly as he speaks. "Your kid's belly looks weird. I think they might be sick." His voice is steady, but inside, his nerves rattle. He doesn't know how else to say it. He doesn't have the right words to explain what he saw, but he knows it isn't right. Any decent parent would at least ask questions, would want to check. He hopes, just for a second, that this man will show some concern, that he'll realize something is wrong. Instead of worry, Langston scoffs. A cold, amused chuckle escapes him as he crosses his arms over his chest. "Since when do street kids diagnose illnesses?" His words cut through the night air, sharp and dismissive. His expression doesn't soften, doesn't change, as if Jaden's words are nothing more than an inconvenience. Jaden opens his mouth to argue, but before he can say another word, Langston reaches down, grabs the toddler roughly by the arm, and yanks them inside. The child stumbles slightly, their tiny frame wobbling as Langston pulls them past the doorway. He doesn't spare them a glance. He doesn't check to see if they're okay. Instead, he turns back to Jaden, his icy glare hardening. "Get lost." And with that, he slams the door. The sound echoes in Jaden's ears, cutting through the silent night like a final cruel statement. He stands there for a moment, fists clenching at his sides, his breath shallow. His gut twists. His heart pounds. He wants to believe the child will be fine, that maybe he was wrong. Maybe Langston is just harsh, but not cruel. Maybe there's someone inside who actually cares. But deep down, he knows better. Something isn't right. He can feel it in his bones, an unease so strong it makes his skin prickle. He takes a step back, his mind racing. He could leave, pretend he didn't see anything. He could go home, bury himself under blankets, and try to forget. But his gut won't let it go. This isn't over. Jaden walks away, but his gut won't let it go. Something isn't right. Have you ever been ignored when trying to help someone? The next day, chaos erupts as sirens pierce the morning air. An ambulance speeds toward the Langston mansion, its flashing lights reflecting off the pristine windows of the wealthy neighborhood. The scene is jarring. Emergency responders rushing toward a house that, from the outside, looks like the picture of perfection. The massive Christmas wreath on the front door and the garland-wrapped pillars stand in stark contrast to the urgency unfolding in the driveway. Jaden, delivering groceries nearby, stops in his tracks as he watches paramedics sprint up the stone steps. His heart pounds in his chest. Something is wrong. Very wrong. His stomach twists as a flood of memories from the night before rushes back. The barefoot toddler, the swollen belly, Mr. Langston's cold dismissal. His gut had screamed at him that something wasn't right, and now, as he watches the doors of the mansion fly open, he knows his worst fears have come true. Moments later, the paramedics emerge, carrying the toddler out on a stretcher. Jaden's blood runs cold. The tiny figure, so frail and unmoving, is strapped down with careful urgency. A medic presses an oxygen mask to the child's small face as another checks vitals. The sight is like a punch to Jaden's chest. He had tried to help. He had warned Langston. And now the child is being rushed to the hospital. The reality of it stings like ice in his veins. He barely notices the whispers around him as neighbors gather, watching the commotion from behind their lavish gates. Some murmur in concern, others with idle curiosity. No one seems to have an answer, only speculation. But Jaden doesn't need to speculate. He knows. He knew last night, and he should have done more. The guilt tightens in his chest, but there's no time to drown in it.
News spreads fast. Within hours, reporters are stationed outside the hospital, their microphones ready as updates trickle in. A doctor's report confirms the grim reality. The child was severely malnourished and had gone untreated for a serious medical condition. The hospital staff is stunned. How could a child from such wealth suffer in such a way? The question burns through the media, sparking outrage. Jaden listens to the reports from a small convenience store's TV, his fists clenched as he hears what the world is only now discovering. But then, the real shocker comes. The toddler's swollen belly wasn't from overeating or untreated illness. It was a symptom of prolonged poisoning. The words send a shudder through Jaden's spine. Poison. Someone had been hurting that child. Deliberately. The implications sink in, heavy and sickening. This wasn't neglect. This wasn't just cruelty. It was something worse. Something calculated. Jaden exhales sharply, his mind racing. Who would do such a thing? And why? He doesn't have the answers, but one thing is clear. He can't let this go. He had been brushed aside once, ignored when he tried to help. That wouldn't happen again. Whatever was happening in that mansion, the truth was starting to unravel. But the real shocker? The toddler's swollen belly was not from overeating or illness. It was a symptom of prolonged poisoning. What do you think really happened? Drop your theories below. Investigators uncover a horrifying truth about the Langston household. What was first assumed to be neglect turns out to be something far worse. As the authorities dig deeper into the family's medical records, private dealings, and financial transactions, a dark and twisted scheme begins to unravel. The Langstons had been hiding something so sinister that it sends shockwaves through the city. Langston and his wife had been secretly giving their child experimental medications to maintain an image of health. The child had been born with a rare genetic disorder, something the wealthy businessman deemed unacceptable. In a world where reputation was everything, Langston refused to let anyone believe his family was anything less than perfect. The disorder was seen as a flaw, a weakness that could not be exposed. Rather than seeking proper medical treatment, the Langstons took matters into their own hands, administering unapproved drugs and experimental treatments to manipulate the child's condition. The deeper investigators look, the more horrifying the revelations become. The medications had been making the child worse, not better. The swollen belly, the frail limbs, the lack of energy, these were all symptoms of prolonged poisoning, caused by the very people who should have been protecting the toddler. Instead of caring for their child, they had turned the little one into a science experiment, prioritizing their status and image over basic human decency. Jaden's concerns had been right all along. The child wasn't just sick, they were being deliberately harmed. He had tried to raise the alarm, tried to get someone to listen, but his words had been dismissed. Now, as the horrifying truth emerges, the weight of it all sits heavy in his chest. He had known something was wrong, but even he hadn't imagined it could be this terrible. The realization makes his stomach churn. This wasn't just abuse, it was calculated cruelty, and it had been going on for years. The media explodes with outrage. News headlines scream about the disturbing case, and protesters gather outside the Langston estate, demanding justice. Social services remove the child from the home, placing them under emergency medical care, while reporters dig through every aspect of the family's history. The illusion of the perfect Langston family crumbles, and soon there is no saving their reputation. Langston is arrested on charges of child abuse and endangerment. The once powerful businessman is escorted from his estate in handcuffs, his expensive suit wrinkled, his face pale. He doesn't say a word as cameras flash, capturing the moment that will define him in history. His wife, too, faces charges, and their wealth, once an impenetrable shield, now offers them no protection from the consequences of their actions. Jaden watches the news from a distance, his emotions a tangled mix of relief, anger, and sorrow. He had tried to help, and for too long, no one had listened. But now, the truth is out. The child is safe. Justice is finally being served. And while it doesn't erase the pain, it means that for once, someone like him, a boy with nothing, had made a difference in a world that had tried to ignore him. The millionaire, obsessed with control, had forced illegal treatments on the child to hide a genetic disorder that could tarnish the family's elite reputation. How do you feel about what Jaden uncovered? Let's discuss in the comments. Jaden is called to the hospital to visit the toddler, now recovering. The sterile smell of antiseptic fills the air as he walks through the brightly lit hallway, his hands stuffed into his jacket pockets. The weight in his chest, the guilt that had lingered for days, starts to ease. The child is safe now. That's what matters. But the image of them on the porch, shivering in the cold, still haunts him. Doctors confirm that without intervention, the child could have died within weeks. The words hit Jaden harder than he expected. His stomach clenches as he sits outside the hospital room, waiting for permission to enter. He had known something was wrong, had felt it deep in his bones, but hearing the confirmation from professionals makes it all too real. If he had ignored his instincts, if he had walked away, that little boy might not have made it. The thought makes his hands tremble. Inside the room, the toddler is hooked up to IVS, their tiny body still weak, but their face is brighter than before. Jaden takes slow steps forward, unsure if he should be here, but a nurse nods encouragingly. The child looks up, blinking at him with familiar wide eyes. A small hand reaches out, fingers barely brushing against his. A lump forms in Jaden's throat. He doesn't know what to say, but he knows one thing. He did the right thing. The media praises Jaden for his bravery, calling him the boy who spoke up. His face is all over the news, his story spreading beyond the city. People recognize him on the street, offering kind words, pats on the shoulder. It's overwhelming. He's never been the center of attention before. Never had people look at him with anything other than pity or indifference. But now, they see him as something more, as someone who made a difference. Social workers ensure that the toddler will never return to Langston's custody. The court moves quickly, stripping the disgraced millionaire of all parental rights. Jaden watches from home as reporters swarm the courthouse, their cameras flashing as Langston is escorted away in handcuffs. The once powerful businessman who had looked down on Jaden with disgust is now the one being judged by the world. Justice has come, and for the first time it feels like the right people are being held accountable. Jaden's grandparents hug him tight, tears in their eyes. His grandmother, her frail hands cupping his face, whispers, "You saved that baby's life, Jaden. Never doubt yourself." His grandfather, usually quiet and reserved, grips his shoulder firmly, pride shining in his tired eyes. Jaden feels the warmth of their love, the reassurance that even in a world that often ignores kids like him, he matters. His voice matters. As he lies in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, he thinks about everything that has happened, the fear, the doubt, the frustration of not being heard. But in the end, he had done what was right, even when it was hard. He closes his eyes, knowing that he won't forget this. Not today, not ever. Social workers ensure that the toddler will never return to Langston's custody. Would you have done what Jaden did? Let's talk about standing up for others. Weeks later, Jaden walks past the now empty Langston mansion. The towering estate that once symbolized wealth and power now stands abandoned, its grand windows dark and lifeless. The perfectly trimmed hedges are overgrown, the air around it eerily still. Langston is in prison, his reputation in ruins, his fortune drained by legal battles. Jaden pauses for a moment, staring at the house that had once dismissed him as nothing. Now, it's just an empty shell, a reminder of how quickly power can crumble when built on cruelty.
Meanwhile, the toddler is placed in a loving home, finally safe. The thought warms Jaden's heart. The child will grow up in a place where they are cared for, where they will never have to endure neglect or pain again. He smiles slightly at the thought, knowing that the nightmare they lived through is now behind them. That's what matters most. Not the headlines, not the attention, just the fact that the child has a future now, one filled with love and safety. But something incredible happens. Jaden's story inspires people nationwide. His bravery spreads beyond his city, igniting conversations about justice, class, and the power of speaking up. Schools invite him to talk about what he did. News outlets continue to follow his journey. People who once ignored kids like him now listen. They see him not as a statistic, but as proof that doing the right thing matters, no matter who you are or where you come from. A wealthy donor, moved by Jaden's courage, offers to fund his education and help his struggling grandparents. The news comes as a shock, and at first Jaden doesn't know how to react. He has spent so much of his life just trying to survive. He never thought about what it would mean to have real opportunities. With this chance, he can go to a good school. He can help his grandparents. He can finally think about a future that isn't just about getting by. For the first time, Jaden sees a future beyond struggle. He walks home, the city lights flickering around him, feeling something new: hope. He doesn't have to carry everything alone anymore. He doesn't have to wonder if his voice matters. He proved it does. As he steps inside his small home, he sees his grandparents waiting for him, their eyes shining with pride. He wraps them in a hug, holding on to the love that has kept him strong all these years. They ignored me because I'm poor, but I proved that doing the right thing is what truly matters. A wealthy donor, moved by Jaden's courage, offers to fund his education and help his struggling grandparents. What's the biggest lesson from Jaden's story? Let's talk in the comments.